the issues that are going on in your papers, you know, in privacy in my office, or, you know, if you read what I'm saying and everything seems to make sense, then fix it, right? Start doing it better for the next paper. That's not hard to do. So far, I mean, just so you know, I mean, just because my spreadsheet just calculates it out, right? That the average grade for both of the sections combined, or all three of the sections combined, the average grade so far, not all the data are in yet, but the average grade is right around C-, right? So there's people who are getting high C's, B's. There was one A, remarkably. There were some B's, there were some high C's and stuff, so they were offsetting a lot of the papers that were D's and F's. So if I stopped reading the paper, that's assume the worst, right? I mean, but if I made it through the paper and you still had some of those really fundamental problems, it really probably meant that the writing was good and you were able to maintain that, but the argument maybe or something else was just coming off the rails, and that's the reason why you ended up word. All right. So let's now learn from those mistakes and make this better for paper 3, right? So what I want to do today is I'm going to go back to those papers that you were presenting, and I want to talk to you about look, the easy part is offering the criticism, right? Is to tell me what's wrong with study. I mean, that's simple, right? I think most people who are able to read and think critically are going to be able to pull the problems out of these articles. I had some really interesting conversations with people this morning in my office who were coming in and they're showing me their topics, and I'm thinking, wow, that's really kind of exciting stuff. As I said before, avoid those topics that are belief system topics, like suicide, doctor-assisted suicide, things like abortion, or and if you're going in the route, I had a student this morning, I mentioned the other day, if you're going the route of medical marijuana, right? I don't want to read about medical issues. I want to read about the social, political, legal issues. And a student brought a paper in this morning, which I thought was really exciting, where her research paper was on crime rate increases within a certain radius of medical marijuana dispensaries. Let's start that again. Medical marijuana dispensaries, and what they did is they set a radius of like a couple miles away from that dispensary and measured crime rates in there. Now, what do you think they found? Crime go up around those dispensaries? What do you think they found?
It decreased.
Say it again?
Did it decrease?
No, it actually, it increased, but it didn't increase, well, here's the thing. How are we defining crime? Traffic tickets? Is people speeding, or is there like armed robbery and murders going on there, right? How would they define crime? So that's kind of question number one, right? I would want to know. And would it matter to you? Like, let's just think about this for a second, right? So let's say that they do differentiate between types of crime out there, and let's say that types of violent crime don't change, but the more like generic types of crime, like speeding tickets or something like that, go up, right? Would that matter to you? You don't care? The law's the law, man. You're breaking the law, you shouldn't be doing that. That's what I'm thinking. I mean, is there a reason to differentiate the crimes? I'm just asking you to think about that, right? I mean, would it be more eye-opening if there were more serious crimes going on there? I would also think about this, right? Well, think about, right, are pot users more inclined to commit more crimes anyways? Is there some kind of reasoning for doing that? Like, I mean, what would we expect, right? I mean, we have a high concentration of pot users, right? Does crime go up in those neighborhoods? That'd be interesting to know, right? Wouldn't we want to know that? Right? What's the standard increase of crime in a neighborhood, right, over an amount of time, right? Wouldn't we want to know that first? Like, wouldn't we want to kind of take a control group? Let's find a, pot using community, right? And then study, what the rates of crime are within that radius of that. Maybe that helps us understand something, right? But just to randomly pick a dispensary and look at crime rates, I mean, where's the correlation between crime rates and the dispensary? How do we know that the neighborhood's just not going to hell? Or maybe the neighborhood's transitioning to be less crime-ridden. Maybe that's the reason why. Who knows?
Are they observing before the dispensary was there compared to after the dispensary was there? Or are they just comparing places?
No, they're looking before the dispensary was there to then after. Right. So they're trying to correlate that by putting that dispensary there, you were somehow attracting in crime people like rats coming into the neighborhood, right? Well, I'm just saying that. That's what the study is really about, right? So if we think about that, right, how would we study that? Right? How do we determine whether we know what's wrong with the study, right? In the sense that that's pretty limited in what it does. How could we, not thinking about the study, but just thinking independently now, right? How could we study whether the dispensary is somehow leading to higher crime rates in an area? How can we study that? Yeah.
You'd have to look at like the people who were committing the crimes and then try to connect them to the people who were getting things from the dispensary.
Explain that. That's interesting what you're saying. So you want to look at individuals who are committing the crimes, like
Yes.
before the dispensary got there, or you're just looking at like after the dispensary got there. You want to find out. I mean, ladies, are you thinking about like doing blood tests and drug screenings on people who are committing crimes to find out if they've got pot in their system? Is that what you're thinking?
That wasn't exactly what I was thinking.
Well, that's what I mean. I'm sorry that I threw your study into chaos, but I think would that be? Let's look at my idea first, since I'm controlling this conversation. So let's look at my idea. Would my idea be a good thing to bring into play here? If we look at people who are committing crimes, we ask them to take a blood test so we can find out what's in their bloodstream.
That would be the best because then you can't say that the primary system is coming from the dispensary.
That's right. So then how would I know where they got the pot from, right? So then again, so now you would have to go and maybe a better way to do it would be to find those people who are committing crimes who've got a dispensary card, right? But then again, I don't think that's what the study's trying to do. I don't think we're trying to look to see if the people, I think what they're trying to do is say, does the dispensary create a culture of increased crime? Like, does it draw in the rats? Right? I think that's what they're trying to figure out there, not necessarily people who are on medical marijuana now committing crimes. Yeah.
Would it be a problem if it was already a high crime area as opposed to?
Yeah. So I think what your point is, we got to figure out the control, right? In other words, we've got to know what the rate of crime is. And here's the other thing, right? So how we can do that? It's if we've got a neighborhood, let's say we've got a 3-mile radius around this dispensary, right? How would we know that the changes that you saw in crime were related to the dispensary's arrival there, or are there other socioeconomic factors that could be causing a change in that neighborhood? How will we control for that? Can we control for that? I mean, can we look at those numbers and kind of statistically bear it out that, this is where we see crime on a trajectory going, right? I mean, can we know this, and does that trajectory change somehow? Just throwing that out there. I mean, this is a pretty good idea.
I feel like if you would have that, you would have to have like a drastic change. You would have to have like a very good neighborhood and then have it drastically change.
See, and that's exactly what I found in the studies that was so unconvincing about the study was that there was an increase in crime, but it wasn't huge. Well, then again, like I asked the question 1,000 times to you guys when you were writing these papers, people would give me responses. They would say, hey, there was this kind of change in the patients, and I was writing in the margin, is that good? I don't know. Does it meet your standard? Right? Is that meaningful? Right? You told me that the patient changed 43% in their reports of range of motion or something like that. And I'm going, what does that mean? Right? Is that good? It's the same thing here. So if we see an increase or a decrease, it's got to be pretty radical in order for us to be claiming that the rats are taking over, right? Yeah. So there would have to be some expectations there that, we got a serious social problem if certain things happen. So the question becomes, how are you defining drastic? It's an interesting topic, though. But that's where I need you to be with, if you're dealing with something like medical marijuana, I don't want you to focus on the medicine side. I want you to focus on the social, legal, political issues. All right, so what else have you got? You want to talk about your topics? I'm all ears. I want to hear what you have to say and be able to present what you are arguing, and let's hear what the most important part, right? The hard part of this is going to be, how do we rethink this? How do we establish a different form of a kind of a research path in order to get better answers on this? And anybody want to talk about their topics? Yeah.
It's basically the malpractice concerns in defensive medicine and breast pathologists.
Boy, I was standing in here earlier. I was walking down the hall and I heard Dr. Ross going, we spend more money in this country on healthcare than any other country in the world. And he was talking about obviously some other things, but then I walked in the classroom and was just like, okay, tell me, what are the reasons why this country spends more money on healthcare than everybody else? Right? I mean, is it because of the practice of defensive medicine? That could be a factor, right? But what are some other factors? Why does this country spend more money on healthcare than every other country in the world? Why? Give me a bunch of reasons. There's tons of them. What?
Better medical practices.
Better medical
More
practices mean that if you're paying, if you want a higher quality of care, it's going to cost you. Maybe that could be one. What else? What are some other reasons why we spend more?
Higher drug prices.
Okay, higher drug prices because there's no limit on that, right? In a privatized system, you can charge whatever you want. The market bears that responsibility, right? So if people stop buying it, then they're going to have to lower their prices. But as long as we keep paying it, right? I think about this, right? I go to a party, it's open bar, right? I get my drink. I'm talking to somebody. I set my drink down, right? I turn around and look. There's 3 glasses there, and I forget which one is mine. You think I'm going to worry about which drink is mine? I'm going to go right back to the bar and get another one, right? It's open bar. If I was paying for it, though, I'm probably figuring out whose drink is this, right? I want to know. But when it's controlled, right? I mean, then there's going to reduce those. What were you going to say?
There's medical like treatments and technologies.
So more about the quality of care thing. So advanced quality means higher cost, right? Which means that there's probably a bunch of more research that's going into things as well, right? Which we're going to have to recoup those costs if we're doing the research on it. What else? What are some other reasons why we spend money on healthcare more here than any place else in the world?
We have higher rates of certain diseases or sicknesses like obesity.
We have higher research. Is this an unhealthy country? How do we stack up? And this is really another interesting study out there, right? About how we compare in health to the rest of the world, right? I mean, where they always want to say, well, the United States, the life expectancy is only 74, where in other countries, in the world, life expectancy is, is higher. So all the healthcare money you're spending doesn't get us the results. You guys aren't living longer. And I'm thinking to myself, that doesn't make any sense, right? Since when does healthcare correlate into life expectancy? Isn't life expectancy probably more controlled by genetics? Now, if you want to make an argument that people are less healthy because, think about this, right? I mean, this is actually an interesting point, right? Well, we know in some states in this country, we have, rates of obesity that are now exceeding 35% of the population. What do we associate with obesity? Diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, right? All those long-term care problems, right? Things that are going to lead to greater health costs. What would happen in countries that, why Why do people in this country have those problems?
Right? So,
Diet, lifestyle, because we can, right? We're wealthy. We can do whatever we want to do. We want to eat McDonald's every day, we can do it. You think people in other countries have the luxury of doing those things like we do? No, of course not. Do they have the amount of disposable income that we have? We're the wealthiest country in the world, right? There's a reason why we're unhealthy. We choose to be fat and happy, right? I'm just saying there's a reason why we spend more money on healthcare, and maybe one of the reasons we do is because we can, right? We're wealthy. We can spend money on that. Where other people in other countries might not even have access to healthcare, might not even choose to go spend money on healthcare because they realize that maybe they don't think it's important to them. Maybe they just have lower expectations. I don't know. Maybe access is limited in some of those countries. Maybe access is greater here than in other places. Maybe people who are really unhealthy in our country have access to healthcare, right? You want to control healthcare costs? Let's start limiting healthcare to people, right? Let's start telling the unhealthy people, don't come. Wouldn't that control our costs? Can't really do that. So maybe it's by giving access to people, that's the reason why we're spending more money, because now people who normally wouldn't have access to healthcare are getting it. There's a lot of reasons why we do it. Defensive medicine is one, though. So explain what they were doing in their study.
So they sent out a survey to 252 breast pathologists and had like a 15-minute survey where they asked them questions, like gave them scenarios and asked whether or not they would like pursue defensive medicine.
Right, right. In other words, if you're going to make a decision on this, you're going to do something to cover your backside and not just go one route that you know is probably the right route.
Yeah, so it was like behavior questions and then like referral questions. And then they asked whether or not these breast pathologists thought their peers pursued the same
Interesting.
malpractice.
Yeah, there's a real scientific matter, right? Are your peers doing this?
Yeah, it was an opinion based. And
Yeah.
it didn't really yield many good results.
All right, so what did they find? They find that people were more likely to practice defensive medicine?
Yeah, and they only found a difference between myself and my peers in ordering immunohistochemistry
Okay.
tests. So like that was the only significant difference between myself and my peers. But pretty much,
So they were saying your peers were doing it. In other words, they were blaming other people for the problem?
yeah, essentially.
Human nature, right?
And more than 50% of all the 202 people asked said that they would practice.
Said they would?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's put this into perspective, right? So you got majority of people saying that they would practice defensive medicine. So what's to say that that's not the right choice to make, though? I mean, was there a right or wrong answer in those scenarios? No. I mean, the tool is faulty there, right? I mean, asking a survey and asking you to respond to that. I mean, how do you know that someone's just not thinking, you know what, hey, there's this other factor in here. Let's just maybe rule that out first, right? I mean, if you're trained in medicine from, like the primary care perspective, a lot of times you assume the best and then kind of just wait to see where things go. But if you're in an emergency room situation, right, you assume the worst and work backwards from that, right? I mean, so it depends on what area of medicine you're practicing as to how you approach the patient. That happens, right? So there's not a one-size-fits-all, for decision-making in medicine. So so obviously we can shoot the study full of holes. So what do we need to do to rethink? Right. So their objective here is to establish the people are practicing defensively, right? And it's probably costing us. So what do we need to do to study defensive medicine and its association with cost? How would we be able to study that? What would we need to do? Go ahead.
You to like take out the bias, so instead of asking them what would you do to put them in a situation where they have to make a decision.
All right, so we got to put them in type of a real world scenario. Okay, so you're going to have real patients, and you're going, now here's the question. How do you know if they're making the right decision or whether they're making a defensive medicine decision? In other words, how would we know what the patient requires? Do we know what every patient requires of us when we treat them? Absolutely not, right? I mean, it's just variability. We don't know what the expected outcome of every patient is going to be. If we look at patients in general, right, we can say, all right, generally people with this condition go to this form, right? But can we know what every person who walks in the door, what the expected outcomes of that person's condition are? No, because of the various factors that can do that. So there's a little bit of a problem with your scenario, and that, I mean, I like the fact that you would put real patients in there, but you also have to recognize what are the problems or the things that I'm presenting here, right? Don't just run off the end of the cliff with your argument and just say, hey, you know, here's an idea, right? But if your idea doesn't put us any further ahead, then scrap that idea. Let's think of something else, or think of a way to control that. So here's the other thing, right, is to be able to put, when do people most likely practice defensive medicine? When there's a risk, right? Or something bad happening. So what are the chances of us being able to find someone who's not willing to take the, wouldn't risk-taking even go to like personality traits? Wouldn't certain physicians be more inclined to be risk-takers than others? That's a really good question, right? I mean, how do we know who's taking risks here in the first place? Wouldn't we know that some people generally take risks and other people don't? There's a lot of things that go into that, which would just make your head spin trying to control those, right? How could we possibly study whether people are practicing defensively other than just asking them the questions? Do you think you're doing this? And the other question would be, well, what's the cost, right? Because what I would try to figure out is what the cost benefit is, right? If you do practice defensively and you get right a couple of times, right? Doesn't that save us all money and headache and legal fees? Sure. So there's maybe some benefits to it. Maybe, wouldn't we want to figure out maybe if practicing defensively couldn't produce benefits too? Yeah.
Wouldn't there be benefits for the patients as well? I would rather have my doctor go above and beyond.
Go with more care instead of just the right care? That's the age-old question, and this is something that we are dealing with all the time. We'll talk about this throughout the rest of the semester, right? I mean, how are we defining a quality of care? Right? How do we know what we're supposed to do and what's the right thing to do and what the expectations are of what we're doing? Right? What establishes quality care? We were actually talking about this in this morning's class. Like we got off onto a different subject about evaluating therapists. Right? In other words, I can't remember. Somebody came up with a topic and we ended up asking the questions like, how do we know what makes a quality therapist? How do we study whether you guys are doing, it all became, it stemmed out of the conversation about whether the DPT was necessary. I think that's what we got our conversation going. But ultimately, we were talking about, you know, some people were saying, well, you know, there's people out there practicing with bachelor's degrees, and there's people practicing with master's degrees, and there's people practicing with DPTs, and those people who are practicing out there are just as good a therapist as somebody with a DPT. So how would we know that the DPT is worth anything? What are we doing putting you through more years of school if we can get the same job done with just a 4-year degree? So that's how we started asking the question, how are we defining what makes you good? How would you know if you're a good therapist or not?
Patient satisfaction.
Yeah, patient satisfaction, but then again, all right, that's a great, I laugh because I think about this all the time, right? You guys do student opinion surveys of your faculty, right? Are you Are you professors? Do you know what's supposed to be going on in those classes? Do you know what the objectives and those kind of things are of those faculty all the time? So what puts you in a position to be a good evaluator of what I'm doing in my classroom? Yeah, why do you evaluate?
Because we took the class.
What's that?
Because we took the class.
I didn't hear you.
We took the class.
I mean, let me ask you this. Are you more likely, have you ever read, there's actually an interesting study just came out on student opinion surveys, and people who were quote unquote better looking than others got higher ratings on their student opinion surveys. That the more attractive faculty got higher. And you know how this all got started? From that stupid rateyourprofessor.com or something like that, some chili pepper button you're supposed to press or something like that. I'm not familiar with it, but I was reading this article and this guy was talking about how students rate their faculty's looks. And so this guy at, I think it was Colorado, I think University of Colorado, decided to try to do a study on it. So he took physical appearance and said, okay, let's hold that as the independent variable here and see what comes up of people's responses. So, I mean, you know as well as I do, right? I mean, how you rate a class may be just, there's another study on student opinion surveys. Yeah, I'll tell you about this one. It's kind of interesting. You know that statistically speaking, the student opinion surveys, if you gave a student opinion survey to someone after class 1, is exactly the same as what it is at the end of the class.
What are the questions?
Well, it's the same thing. They give them the same student opinion surveys, right? Ask them to rate the course on all the different factors, right? And statistically speaking, if we gave you a student opinion survey after day 1, it would be exactly the same as it would be at the end of the semester. Why is that? First impressions, right? Does your faculty member walk in and give you a sense of confidence that he knows what he's talking about? Maybe that's a factor. I just, so I go right back to your point. Like, if you're going to rate a therapist, why would we ask a patient whether your therapist was good? Because, I mean, what if your therapist just brings you in cookies and, you sit there and talk about your personal problems and those kind of things, but you're really not getting the job done. Are you still going to like that person? Are you going to feel satisfied? Maybe it's going to influence it, right? I don't want to go too much into that. You can probably understand what I'm thinking. But so like patient satisfaction, I could say, all right, I get it, as long as the patient satisfaction questions are based on the outcomes, right? All right, so what else can we rate a therapist on? How else would we evaluate whether you guys are good at your job or not?
How they have different positions in the field.
Yeah, so if you're asking people in the field what they think of you, right? So, I mean, question becomes, right, how much crossover with other practitioners do you have where they're able to evaluate you? I get this all the time where I have a faculty member who I know who asks for like a letter of recommendation. I'm just like, I don't know this person. I don't know what they can do in their classroom. I just know them on a social basis, but I don't really know how they perform. It's like when students ask me for letters of recommendation, like they're going out for some job or something like that. And, I've written those letters like, I can't believe this student asked me for a letter of recommendation. Right? And that's my first sentence in a lot of those. What's the matter? You don't think that's nice? I'm not in the business of being nice, right? I mean, I'm in the business of being good at my job, right? And if I don't know you and I have no real understanding of what you're capable of doing other than what you can write in a classroom, I've got no reason to be writing letters of recommendation for you, right? I mean, if you want a letter of recommendation from me, expect me to give a pretty honest answer, right? We would expect that from people in the profession, right? If you're a good professional, then you're going to know what good looks like. You're going to hold the standard. You're going to expect everybody else to meet the standards. And those people who don't meet the standards need to be exposed, right? We need to be able to do that. If we want the profession to get better, we should be interested in promoting people who are good. So how do we define them? How do we know who's good at their job? That's a tough one. But it certainly is a factor out there, right? And it was actually, this conversation grew out of a student's article where they were looking at accreditation standards for different programs. And they were trying to associate those accreditation standards, like board certifications and those kind of things, licensure, those, what they require in the program to earning potentials. Like how much money were they making? Does a board exam dictate how much money you're going to make? Probably not. What dictates how much money you're going to make? You know? What dictates success in college? I found this, I had a conversation with somebody the other day, you know, they're saying, well, you know, I was a really good writer in high school, and now I'm here, you know, and you're telling me I'm not a good writer, and I'm just like, you're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy. Right? I mean, look, I mean, the standard, was that you? Was that you having a conversation? Oh, okay. No. The standards are different, right? I mean, is there an expectation that the standards at this level would be different than the standards in high school? Of course. What is telling me that what you did in high school got to do with anything with this? Right? We're now held to a different level of responsibility. So it's got into this question, right? You know, does it matter what high school you went to? Is that going to determine your success in college? You think that matters? Let me just ask you, do you think the high school you went to matters in determining what your success is in college? You're shaking your head no. Why?
Because you can come from anywhere.
That's right, right? And so what is a high school doing that would prepare you? So a lot of people will say, well, maybe it's the curriculum, right? You ever read those articles? Oh, there's this high school. It's a really innovative school, and they're doing all these things because they're focusing on this. So what? What does that mean? Right? They're doing something innovative. Does it produce a better outcome? In other words, do the students there perform better in college? Do they go on to get the jobs that they want? Are they more satisfied with their lives afterwards? Do they make more money? There's a variety of different ways we can define success, right? But what's the objective of, do any of those things have any bearing on how you're going to succeed in life? So I one that's been correlated time and time again. The one factor that's been correlated with success in college and then your earning potential. You know what that is? One factor. What? Sorry. Good try. Parent wealth. Parent wealth. That's the only thing that's ever been correlated consistently with success in college, which then translates into the job that you want, life satisfaction. Interesting. Yeah, why? Better resources. In other words, it's not about the school you go to or something like that. Or hear about this. How about, why do people who go to those expensive private schools end up in the jobs that they want? Is it because they're naturally more smarter, or is it because their parents have more resources to get them experiences or get them associated? You know, the most expensive school in the country is Bennington, right, in Vermont, right? Anybody ever hear of Bennington? $65,000 a year to go there. Yeah, this is tuition, right? Is Bennington on like the top 10 of every college list you've ever seen? You've ever seen Bennington on those lists? No, right? Why not? Because they're not doing anything there. But so why do the wealthiest people in the country send their kids there? Because it's expensive, because they got the money to spend it and they can?
Like destroying themselves with other rich kids.
That's right. And so what's that going to do for those kids?
They can form like partnerships.
Sure, it builds those relationships, right? You need that internship on Wall Street. Your roommate's dad is the president of American Express. Guess what? Hey, can I talk to your dad? Right? So a lot of times those private schools, they get all those high rankings, and those school districts get all those high rankings. It's got nothing to do with what they're doing in the classroom. Right? It's got everything to do with parent well. Yes?
Wouldn't it almost work the opposite way in certain situations though? Because I feel like in my experiences, the kids who are like going to school and like their parents don't have a lot of money tend to work way harder in their classroom because they have to stay there to keep their scholarships. Whereas
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I understand what you're saying, but I mean, I look, how many times have I seen kids come into my office and they're sitting there failing in class and they're saying, I'm working really hard at this, and I'm just going, what do you want me to say? Right? I mean, you can work as hard as you want. If you don't have brain power, right, you're not going to be able to overcome that obstacle. And sometimes that's just the nature of genetics, right? Some people are just born with a faster running hamster. So, I mean, look, don't take offense to any of the things that I'm saying. I'm just trying to tell you, like, this is how we think about things, right? And this is what it means to be a professional. You got to understand what you're dealing with, right? When you're out there in the world and you're a professional, right, and you're tasked with responding to situations and those kind of things, that you have some common sense, you're able to respond to things, right? Because in this wacky world that we're in, the loonies are winning. That's what's concerning to me, right? Is that when people are sitting around talking about, free college tuition, right? Or like single payer health care and stuff, you got to know what you're talking about, right? Sure, I would love to give health care away for free. I'd love everybody to be able to have access to health care. But how much is it going to cost? How are we going to pay for it? I'd love tuition to be free here. I'd love to accept everybody who wants to come to college. Come, great. I'd love to give you those opportunities. Everybody should have access to go to medical school. Everybody who wants to be a doctor should have access to go and try to go be a medical school. But can we reasonably accommodate all of those people who want to do that? Would it be worth our time to have all those people come in, take up those seats, and then just fail out? Of course not, right? We've got to be reasonable about things. It just doesn't, the world, sure, we'd love for things to be certain ways, and we'd like to see the world in those ways, because we don't want to hurt people's feelings, and we want to give people opportunities. But at the same time, right, someone's got to be watching the cash register, right? How are we paying for this? How are we going to do this? I'm sitting at a baseball game this summer, man. I'm just, his dad sitting next to me. I don't know how we got on this, right? But, start talking about healthcare or something, and he just, makes this offhand comment, well, I really wish we were more like Canada. And just like, I'm not going to let that go, right? But no, look, that's your responsibility too, right? I mean, just because people have thoughts doesn't mean that they're right. So you have to, as a professional, as a person who's educated in your field, and a person who looks at research and who understands how to critically think about subjects, you need to be able to talk about those things with people who make those kind of comments to you, right? Because if you don't, then the weakest ideas start to win. You understand the problem with that, right? When we're not willing to stand up and say, look, man, you need to stop talking and rethink your position right now. Right? Let's look at it from this perspective. If you're not willing to do that, you're such a nice person, you're accommodating people's ideas like that, well, then they're going to think that they're right. They're going to vote that way, right? And that's going to undo your profession. I was at a wedding last summer, man. This is low points in my life, but I have to tell you about it. But I'm sitting there, and there's this one of my friend's daughters home from college, and she's spouting off about some issue, at this wedding. And so I just kind of intervened, and I just said, hey, I know a little bit about what you're talking about. You know, you want to have. And I asked her, I'm like, do you want to have an adult conversation about this? I said, because I'm willing to have an adult conversation if you want to have that. Right? I don't think she understood what adult conversation meant. Because a few minutes after we started talking, she left the wedding crying, right? And I'm the bad guy, right? Everybody's looking at me like, there's the guy who forced to. But my point is that, look, you know, if you are going to have opinions, and if you're going to put them out there into the public domain, you need to be able to defend them. Just because you like it doesn't make it right. And if you're not willing to think critically about things, if you're not willing to defend those things with reason and logic, then you're not operating in reality. So you guys, I mean, the reason I'm having this conversation with you is that you need to be willing and I would say aggressively pursuing, right, informing people about healthcare, right, about how the system works, about how you fit into that environment, how what you do makes things happen that are good in this world, right? There's a reason why research is important. Right? It's the reason why you not only need to be informed about the social, political, legal issues, but you also have to be informed medically, right? When you're a professional in your field, you need to be able to be out there and defending your field. If you can't defend your field, then people are going to say, well, I can find an alternative. And of course they can find an alternative. It's very easy to do so. Just because there's an alternative doesn't mean that it's the right alternative. We got to know what's good, what's bad, right? I mean, being a professional sometimes means that you have to take unpopular positions, right? And you have to be able to put yourself in a position where, you know, people may not like what you're saying, but that shouldn't matter, right? Because you should be interested in putting out what's right. I'm just thinking that, you know, every day, what I find happening more and more is that, and this all started with that free tuition thing, right? I mean, everybody's out there marching around going, you know, want free tuition. And it's like, yeah, you want free tuition? I mean, okay. Right? You get what you pay for. How about that? Did your parents ever tell you there's no such thing as a free lunch? Yeah, right, yeah, because usually strings attached, right? Or what you're going to get is just going to be lower quality. I guess it's up to you, really, what you want out of this world. If you want to spend your money foolishly, or if you want to just, you know, make decisions whimsically, then go ahead and do that, right? Just don't get to the middle of your life and turn around and complain that you didn't have choices, right? That's the thing that is disturbing, is when people get to a point in their lives where they suddenly realize that, hey, you know, I really didn't reach my potential. I really, you know, I ended up here. Well, how did I get to this situation, right? And I'm just like, you're a bad decision maker, man. You ended up there because you chose to be there. I get this, I mean, my point in life, right, you know, over the last 5-10 years, I've been getting these phone calls from these, you know, buddies of mine who've been working in business, and they're out there, you know, they've been in the job, you know, they went right out of college into some corporation, and then they've been there for 25 years now, and, you know, 30 years, and they're looking ahead, and they're like, I got 15 more years before I can retire, you know, and they just are miserable. And suddenly they all think that they can become professors. Right? That's what they call me. Like, you know, hey, how can I get into doing what you're doing? Right? And I'm just like, you missed the boat. Man, I mean, you should have made that decision 30 years ago. Because there's no way you're turning that around now. Right? So then they end up dissatisfied with their lives. And so what do? They do stupid stuff, right? To give themselves some kind of meaning in life. Or they just, you know, go out and start cheating on their wives, end up in Vegas and end up in jail somewhere doing something stupid, right? I mean, stupid stuff, right? All to do what? Because they're dissatisfied with the position of their lives right now? They were just bad decision makers earlier? Here's the other thing, it gets me like, if you're a bad decision maker, do I really want you in my profession? Why do you want to come do what I do if you're a bad decision? So you can influence other young people how to be bad decision makers? Ah! It's not where I expected the conversation to end up today. Tell you that. But I do want you to know that on Friday, we're going to shift gears kind of dramatically, and we're going to be working out of the textbook with verb-based writing strategies. And we're going to start talking about some really interesting things like brain science stuff on Friday, right? And I'm going to get you moving in a direction to start like analyzing your papers and analyzing the language that you use in terms of, you know, what kind of meaning does it create? So we will have some really important conversations where then we will start practicing what we're learning with, and so I know we got a long weekend coming up, so next week when we get back together, we're going to spend Wednesday and Friday practicing more of these strategies, and then after that, papers due, right? The next draft of paper number 3 is due after that, that following week. So we're going to be distancing ourselves from the conversation of these papers, right? These social, political, legal issues. And we're going to be focusing on some, you know, strengthening our language choices. And then I'm going to expect you to paper number 3, be implementing those strategies, to be controlling the argument, to be having, you know, meaningful suggestions for change and research. That I'm going to expect you to be grammatically correct, and I'm going to expect you to know how to use punctuation, and I'm going to expect you to be unified and coherent and all those other things, so that you, by the time we finish paper number 3, you should have the first 4 objectives of this course: unity, coherence, grammar, and diction under control. So that as soon as we're done with that paper number 3, we're going to jump right into the research paper where, you know, so that's where your semester is going to get busy. Okay? So just letting you know where we're going here. So Friday, I need you with your textbooks here ready to talk about verb-based writing strategies.
You actually tell your friends to write decision makers?
I'm sorry, say that again?
You actually